Hello, wherever you're at and whatever you're doing. This is Tara, and today we are talking about one of the most socially accepted and overlooked coping mechanism, and it isn't alcohol or drugs. It is busyness. People often get praised, and while it's quietly costing our peace, our health, our relationships, and our ability to hear ourselves. And our culture rewards busyness, so it's easy to confuse being productive with being healthy. As women, we really feel this pressure. And boy, I remember times I used this as such a coping mechanism instead of looking at my life. And as women, we find ourselves carrying a disproportionate amount of the emotional labor in our families and our relationships, making it a temptation even stronger to be overly busy where we're basically abandoning ourselves. The best marriage book I've read is The Marriage You Want, and it has some great stats regarding the cost of that internal mental load and that mental load on a marriage. So if that's a curious thing for you and you want more information, definitely go to that book, The Marriage You Want. Best ever. So my personal story, I would say I guess this kind of sums up about 2 years ago is when this really started. I was operating at 90% capacity. I'm a full-time realtor that was very busy, and I was very productive and married and going through all of that, and I found myself at 90% capacity. The challenge with that is that left little room for interruptions, grief, and deeper reflection. And I am, as you know, if you listen to this podcast, I am a deep reflector, and I definitely missed some things because I was not taking the time to really look at the things I didn't want to look at. And we're going to talk about that more. I was doing the small pauses, and I was doing some big pauses, like taking a day and a half to myself, but I wasn't doing the regular check-in that I'm going to be talking to you about a little bit later. And it has a great structure, and it can really serve us. So then my niece died, and again, she was 15 years old and died of a common cold virus in 2 days. It was very surprising. And that really put me at an emotional low, a lot of grief. It showed me what wasn't working well for me. And there were 3 areas in my life that it was very apparent were not working well. So I had to address each of those. And I just finished addressing all. It took, like I said, a year and a half to address all of those. And I've done that, but boy, I think I would have been able to be less aware of how these things were creeping up on me had I not been at 90% capacity. And realizing that being highly productive and hitting all the health boxes wasn't the same as being healthy. And I was not regularly and intentionally practice the degree that I needed to take care of myself and to make good decisions and to be intentional. And so it had a cost, and that's why we're talking about it. So my question is, how are you living? Are you living at 90% capacity? Do you have rest time? Do you have think time? Do you have rejuvenation time? If you're a mom with young kids or have active older kids, this may seem like a ridiculous question. And because I have friends in all categories of life, this is an extremely important question for people with young kids or with older kids that are taking a lot of time and energy where the moms are not having any time to themselves or very little. That has a huge cost. And so I'm talking to all of us in all these stages. I really think Jesus was a great example of that. Here he comes to earth, claims to be God, can heal anyone, and yet has a huge mission, but he regularly took time alone with himself. He took time with God, and he regularly made that part of his life. He was a great example of that, and here he was God. Also, I really think it's interesting how God designed us to rest and to sleep, and even gave us a day in the Old Testament, the Sabbath, that was designed for a day of rest because we really need that rejuvenation. And in our society, it can be easily not there or not really rejuvenating. So my question to you and to me is, do you feel guilty when you're resting? And this is a big one. Is silence and quietness uncomfortable? Do you feel like you should be productive? When difficult emotions arise, can you feel them and cope with them? Or do you clean, organize, work, scroll, exercise excessively, help someone else, or start another project? Or can you actually process those emotions? If several of these resonate with you, busyness may not just be productive, it may be a coping mechanism. And I know a lot of people, including myself, that have used this to cope with painful or abusive marriages rather than looking at it. And that's why I was in it for 22 years. I just was busy, and that had a physical and mental cost. So what happens when we rest and are quiet when we're in an addictive pattern of busyness? Well, it's challenging because everything we've been pushing down suddenly asks for our attention. And unless we have a process and a way of dealing with those things, it can be a lot. But if we don't start, it just will escalate even more. That's why when we're alone, it can often feel like uncomfortable, is because we're not regularly taking out the trash. Instead of listening, we'll often reach for more busyness, and that is not serving us. It's not serving our hearts and our souls. So what happens? Why are we doing this? And I think there's 4 reasons why a lot of us do this. First of all, it could just be related to our identity. Like, we're a productive person. If I'm not accomplishing, what am I? My worth comes from what I do. And identity is huge. So podcast 11 really talks about identity, and really how we identify ourselves affects so much about what we do. And if we have our identity wrapped up in our production and our busyness, and that's where we get our meaning, then that's going to really affect us, that identity challenge. The second one, why we tend to numb ourselves with busyness, is our belief system. And you'll see that these overlap and intermingle, but I do want to separate them out. Beliefs, for example, not being valuable enough unless we're productive. Rest is lazy. That's a belief that can really cause a person to be wound up. Or another one, this was a one that I had, is good people are sacrificing and serving others all the time. And another one is everyone else needs me. Keep up with the Jones. One that's a really big driver is I must be perfect to be enough or worthy. So the third reason why we tend to numb ourselves with busyness is avoidance. Busyness keeps me from hearing those difficult emotions. And if I stay moving, I don't have to process it for a time at least. And it keeps me from hearing my body. And that is huge, because not only are our emotions going to speak to us, but when we're not listening, then our body starts to get sick. And that can be very costly. And the fourth reason why we numb ourselves with busyness is it gives us a sense of control when maybe things aren't feeling in control. Maybe when we quiet ourselves down, we have a lot of dissatisfaction we don't know how to deal with. But having a sense of control and really being in control, completely different things. And obviously, we don't even have that much control, but we do have control over ourselves, what we choose to do, our choice of emotions and our vision. So there's a lot we do have control of. So there's a cost of avoiding listening to our feelings and hearing our body. So what is the cost of this chronic busyness to such a degree? And it's an emotional, it causes dysregulation. And if we're not taking out the trash, like I mentioned, it starts to build up. So again, I've talked about our minds as kind of a school bus where we're supposed to be the drivers, and we've got all our little parts of us in the bus. But if we ignore all the kids on the bus and they're screaming and one has to go to the bathroom and one needs this, but we keep ignoring them, eventually they're going to want to take over driving the bus. And that causes a lot of challenges emotionally, and have a lot of dysregulation comes with that. It also can cause us physical pain, because as we've been learning a lot on this podcast, about 80% of our physical pain has an emotional or spiritual root. And so it's really important. If you want to know more about that, you could look for the Cure for Chronic Pain podcast, and that's a fabulous resource. It also has a cost on our relationships. In our relationships, we can get somewhere where we're not even sure how we got there. Because if we're not being still and figuring out what's bothering us and doing the uncomfortable work of conflict resolution, it leads for unresolved conflict. And that is disastrous on relationships. So the other cost is, other than emotional and relational, is biological. When we are constantly at a 90% capacity, 95% capacity, our cortisol is up because we're always on. And basically what that does is it can cause a lot of inflammation. Inflammation is basically the major underlying issue or precursor of most health conditions that are chronic and awful. So rather than getting medication for anxiety or depression, when it comes up is to really wonder, okay, what is it trying to tell us? And I'm not against medication for anxiety or depression. I just don't want it to cover up what our body is trying to tell us. And yes, sometimes our bodies are just wired that way. And so many times there's reasons for it, whether it's unresolved trauma of the past, whether it's things that we're going through. But our bodies work in a way that is trying to talk to us. And we're in Western society, we're so used to disconnecting our emotions, our body from our head that we're not hearing what it's telling us. And the fourth cost of avoiding listening and feeling our feelings and hearing our body is it affects our future. Because our emotions and what our body is telling us is trying to give us direction and protection if we're listening to them. And instead, we end up going through the motions and we arrive somewhere, but we're not even sure how we got there and if we want to be there. So it's very easy to lose our path if we're not working with our body and with our emotions. And speaking of emotions, this is the biggest area in coaching that I work with people. And because it's like we've been so disconnected from our emotions, we're not taught that our emotions aren't the problem. They're actually information. They point us towards our needs, our values, our boundaries. Our emotions point us to our griefs, our joys, our desires, and our fears. But when we ignore them, there are consequences. And it's so interesting when I'm coaching people and I'm like, oh, how does that feel in your body? Like, how does that feel? And they're like, well, I think it's like an unsettled thing. But they actually have a very difficult time going into their bodies and being like, okay, I feel a burning sensation in my chest when I think about my anger, and it's right there and it's like, kind of pounding and going like this. Actually feeling it in our bodies, it actually processes within 90 seconds. So getting a practice of literally going into our bodies and feeling the emotions and identifying them is huge as far as taking out the trash and working through those things and getting information from that. And so, but if we're always busy, we can't do that. So the choice is you can live at 90% capacity, you can miss out on your future, you can have physical symptoms, or you can live at a capacity that actually serves you, more of a 75% capacity. And what happens is it creates margin, and margin isn't wasted space. Margin allows flexibility. Margin lets you respond instead of react. Margin creates capacity and creativity. It makes room for relationships and being present and being spontaneous. Margin gives room for God and connecting with God. And margin allows us to ask for help and advocate for help. So how do we create more capacity? Well, first of all, we have to choose, like, this is important. If I don't, I'm not going to like where this is going to end up, and it's going to be hard now, but it's going to be harder later if you don't. So you have to choose it. I hope you've been loving my podcast and growing 1% at a time in our community. And if you've noticed that you want to get somewhere quicker, faster, or you need some personalized attention, then reach out to me, because I do life coaching that involves both the conscious and the subconscious. And that is a way to get somewhere faster, to have personalized care. So reach out to me, sign up for a 15-minute free consultation to see if it's right for you, and we'll see if we can set something up. Make it a great day. And then there's 3 ways I want to teach us about how we can add pauses into our life. So there's the pause, the micro breaks, and that's a day-to-day thing. There's the rest, which is the weekly, quarterly, and then there's the thinking time, and that's creating the life we want. So let's break it down. So the micro pause, the break. So this is funny. This is what I used to do with Mike all the time, is we would text each other, pause. And what that meant is we needed to take a deep breath, not just a long breath, but a belly breath. We needed to slow down our breathing, notice our surroundings, have some gratitude, and just check in. How am I really doing? And it was a way to calm our systems and to add a little break to our life. So we would If we needed it, we'd send it and we'd have to do it ourselves. And then when the other person received it, they would have to take that pause too. So we made it a game, and it was a great way to break up the day and add the pause. And it's interesting, I took a whole class about energy, as far as it was energy and for high productive CEOs. And basically micromanaging and having these micro breaks, they found out had a huge capacity for increasing energy versus just going and going and going, because we're actually not made to do that. And so having these micro breaks are huge. A micro break could look like a little walk around your building. It could look like just taking a look at pictures in nature. There's a lot of ways to add micro breaks in. You could set it on your clock, or clocks, or you could set it on your phones to remind you, okay, take a break, and then just get out of what you're doing. And especially if you're doing a lot of computer work, this is really important because our eyes are not meant to look at something close all the time. So just taking a micro break, looking out at the distance, getting up, moving around. So micro breaks are huge. So committing to micro breaks, that's number one. Weekly rest or quarterly rest. Rest is different than escaping. Rest actually restores us, and everyone's rest looks a little differently because it's about like what does restore me and what creates space for me too. Because honestly, you could be busy on vacation. You could be busy getting ready for vacation. You can be busy on a daily thing. So creating, again, breathing room and that space and finding out what nourishes you. The third thing is thinking time. And this is something I wasn't doing in a constructive way, and it would have served me very well if I had, because I just let some things basically get into some things where I'm like, how did I get here? And this is not good. And it was because I really wasn't taking thinking time and looking back at previous thinking time. So what is thinking time? Thinking time is a way to create the life you want. So basically you pick 3 to 5 questions each week. You have your own notebook or your own chair that you're going to sit in, and you literally ask yourself questions like, what and why? What do I want? Why do I want it? What is working for me? What isn't working for me? Do I feel connected with God? Why or why not? What is He saying? Am I acting on what He's saying? Why? What is taking me the most energy? How am I feeling? And then it's really important to break things down into different areas, because there's different areas of finance, relationships, friendships, and asking ourselves honest questions. What am I avoiding? Oh, that's a good one. And why? What am I procrastinating on? Why am I procrastinating? What were some uncomfortable emotions that I had in the last week, and what can I learn from them? Where do I want to go? What is something that I noticed that brought me joy? Why? What is something that added energy, and why is that? So it's just honestly asking yourself questions. And if you have your own either chair that you always do work in, or I'm very visual. So having my notebook, that's literally my thinking time notebook, is so important. And that way you can go back and look at that and review previous weeks and months and years and watch for patterns. Because that, I've been looking back at my journals for the last 5 years. And had I had a separate journal, a thinking notebook, it would have been very, very helpful, because I definitely ended up in a situation where it's like, wow, I think I knew that this was going to have some bad ramifications, and it really is. But I hadn't been taking that thinking time regularly and having my own book for that. So there's a really good book called The Road Less Stupid by Keith Cunningham, and he really mentions thinking time and has some great questions associated with that book. And I've also listened to a couple other people, and they said adding thinking time to their life has been the one thing that has really propelled them in life and in their joy and happiness, because then they're living a life of intention rather than letting busyness taking over and then ending up somewhere they don't want to be. So this episode isn't about working less. It's about understanding why we're working. It's talking about healthy productivity comes from intention, and unhealthy busyness comes from avoidance or a control and trying to avoid. So busyness isn't the problem, but busyness becomes the problem when it keeps us from ourselves. And the goal isn't laziness. The goal isn't doing less. The goal is becoming intentional, creating enough margin to hear ourselves, to process emotions, to connect with God, who is our source, to enjoy relationships, and to become the person we are created to be. So we're going to start by taking a pause right now. I want you to just take a deep breath in, belly breath, and that means your belly's going out as you're breathing in. And then you breathe out slowly. Just adding breathing throughout your day and pausing is another great pause. And take another deep breath in and breathe out. I want you to plan a pause throughout your day. Like decide how many times a day, what does the pause look like? Is it up and stretching? Is it gratitudes? Is it breathing? Plan a pause. Now take another deep breath in and breathe out. Are you creating enough capacity in your life where you're connecting with yourself in a way that's honest and true? If not, choose now that you're going to figure out how to do that. Even if you have to ask for help, figure out a way to do that and support yourself. The cost is too great and it's not going to serve you or me. So commit to that. And then take another deep breath in and breathe out. And then you can go to my website at livebroader.info and you can receive a list of thinking time questions and use that list to have a thinking time practice where you're taking an hour a week. And if that's too daunting, 20 minutes every Friday, every Monday, and think, or maybe Sunday. Have a time of thinking where you're processing and really asking yourself truthful questions. Take a deep breath in and breathe out. Because you are meant to live this light to become the person you are created to be. So live brighter 1% at a time. I believe in you. Make it a great day.